Our next speaker is the CEO of Stimulant, which does large-scale digital and interactive installations and exhibits. He was also he just told me he was the first person to do online SATE preparation. He developed software to do that. Comes from a graphic design background, really neat guy. Please welcome Darren David of Stimulant.
Thank you very much. So I'm not actually nervous, but if some of you are, I'm told it helps to imagine me naked. And that should help you relax. So today I want to talk about architectural-scale interactivity. As I mentioned, my name is Darren David. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Stimulant. We're an experiential design and technology firm in San Francisco. And we build interactive digital experiences for the built environment, which is a mouthful. So I thought it would help to just add a quick video of some of the kinds of things that we do, and then we can kind of take it from there. So, on the topic of risk, I thought this was really interesting when my buddy David from Hush was speaking yesterday, and he asked everybody to raise their hands if they experience risk in the day-to-day. And it was interesting that I actually paused for a sec before I put my hand up, because I realized that as the owner of a small agency who's been doing this bootstrap for 9 years, building this up from nothing, like risk is just normal for me, right? Like that's kind of the day-to-day. But what I'm really acutely aware of is the risk that our clients take when they do something like this, because most of our clients have never done anything like this before. It's big, it's time-consuming, it's expensive, they're putting their company's reputation on the line, potentially putting their job on the line if this thing doesn't come out. And a big part of our process is designed to help just make it feel easy, right? Just take our hand, trust us, we got this figured out. And it's something that I like to call aspirational pragmatism, which may be a fancier way of saying hope for the best and plan for the worst. But I didn't really want to get into that process specifically today. I really wanted to talk about this more from the audience perspective, because at the end of the day, we're building these things, we're putting them out into the real world, and we want people to go out and be successful with these. But a lot of times, these are really new and unfamiliar interactions. They might even be unexpected. You might not even be aware that you're walking into an experience like this, and that we're expecting something from you. And so what I'd like to do is kind of nerd out today a little bit on our design practice and how we use design, experience design, and some of the tools that we've developed to help sort of scaffold that and make that easier for the end user. And I had no idea what Catherine was going to speak about today, so I think these dovetail really well, so I hope you guys are interested in the science of all of this kind of stuff. So I really want to kind of start a little bit from the psychology perspective and talk about where we are today at an interesting intersection between the real world and the digital world. So I think it's fair to say that we are all social creatures by nature as humans, and a lot of the recent polls that have come out have shown that it's not just millennials, everybody is more interested in experiences rather than things. We all love the magic of the shared experience. And it's also no surprise that digital technology these days has really been feeding that as well, right? The ability for us to share these experiences in real time as they happen, photos, videos, streaming, posts, is really, I think, helping us feel more connected. But in a lot of ways, you have to imagine that these experiences are really trapped in the ether, right? There's this device, there's something between us that's keeping us from really being a participant in that experience. We're just spectators in a lot of ways. And now we kind of get into this point where this idea of if we want to have a digital experience, it's taking us out of the present moment, right? And that's kind of flying in the face of tens of thousands of years of human evolution. And in a lot of ways, it feels like we're being asked to choose between being human or being digital. And I think for this crowd here, I probably don't have to talk much about the power of real-world experiences for being transformative, for creating amazing memories. And I also believe that we're probably all here at SATE because we all share some interest and maybe a healthy dose of fear about how technology might and will change those experiences as we move forward. But I'm also willing to bet that this is not what we imagine when we talk about the future of shared digital experiences. But I'm a firm believer that we shouldn't have to choose between being human and being digital. At Stimulant, we feel that we can use technology to bring people together in the same space, and we can also create new ways for us to interact with our environment and sort of open up and expand our minds around that. And this is a discipline, we call these enlightened environments smart spaces, and they exist at the intersection of architecture, technology, and experience design. So let's talk a little bit about what we're dealing with now with this sort of pervasiveness of technology. So that device you have in your pocket has more computing power than a supercomputer did 30 years ago, right? And the experiences today that you have on those phones were, until only recently, available to people that had spent thousands of dollars on an expensive gaming rig or had a high-end console. And the result of this is now, 5 years ago, my parents wouldn't have known that an ATM was a bad experience. But now that they have a banking app on their phone that's orders of magnitudes better, right? The bar has been raised significantly. They can't tell me why it's better, but for those of us who do this on a daily basis, we understand we've got physics-based simulations, we've got high frame rate animations, graphics, really great sound design, and that has really sort of changed people's perception for what a digital experience should be on a global scale. And that's something that we have to make sure we incorporate in our experiences. And a big part of what we're doing in some of these experiences too is making analog objects behave with digital behaviors, or we're giving digital objects something that makes them feel like real world objects. And there's this idea of performance aesthetics, right, where we have a suspension of disbelief. In the real world, you can't scale a photo like going like this by moving your fingers apart. But suddenly, we now have this desire to believe that, and if it drops frames or it lags or it kind of snaps a little bit, doesn't behave the way it's supposed to, suddenly that snaps us out and we don't believe that it exists anymore. The second is that this device has opened us up and familiarized us with new ways of interacting with content. So when I started Stimulant back in 2007, it was about a month before the iPhone came out. And we were building big multi-touch, multi-user experiences, and we had to fight tooth and nail to get people to come up and touch these things because they look like a television. And up until that point, you've been taught your whole life, you don't put your fingers on a television. Things expensive. Now fast forward 2 years, and I was at CES, and there were fingerprints on every single television out there because people had become touch curious, right? And it's this idea of, when a new skill becomes normalized amongst a population, we call that a herd competency, right? So now suddenly people are expecting things to behave in a certain way, and when they don't, they're broken. And I use this picture because we get a lot of phone calls these days from people in the last 5 years that have installed video walls, and they're saying, everybody's touching it, we need to make it interactive. And I'm not saying that that's the solution, but the point is that we need to be aware that people now have different expectations around that. The third is a little bit more subtle, is this idea of personalization, right? Your device is your device. You pick the case for it, your icons are in a certain order on your phone, all of your apps are authenticated to you, so they're only feeding you your data. You ever have to use someone else's phone? It feels kind of dirty, right? I mean, it probably is dirty, but the truth is, it's sort of, you're getting a glimpse into something that's very intimate and something that's very private. But the truth is, experiences in the real world haven't really caught up to that. They're one size fits all. And as a result of this sort of acclimatization to personalized experiences, we now have this feeling that like, wow, this isn't really that compelling, right? I'm just like every other person in the world. And while we're still a long way from what Minority Report is promising us in terms of like true personalization in public space, that doesn't mean that we still can't build experiences that are adaptive and provide uniquely individualized experiences in the real world. And the final thing that I want to touch on that's a shift is when these devices first came out, everybody said, oh, it's a consumption device. You've got your computer for creating, and this thing is just a dumb little thing, and you're just like blah, 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 blah. But that's really shifted, right? We're all creators now. And while I think that we could all have a really long discussion about whether things like adding a filter to a photo really makes you an artist, it has empowered a huge segment of the population who didn't think they had a creative bone in their body to suddenly feel like, wow, I did something unique, and I want to make this unique, and I want to share it. So it's not just enough to consume the content, it's not just enough to snap it, but now I want to make it my own. And that's changed a lot of what we do in our world as well. It's not just that people want to experience an environment, they want to have an impact on it. They want to leave their trace. And so really, when you think about it, expectations have really changed. So it's not simply good enough to include technology, when we're doing, a new building or a new ride or a new attraction. It's that we have to meet or exceed those expectations, or else people are just going to revert back to the thing that they already are familiar with and they know is cool. So those new expectations have brought some new challenges, of course. And the first is this idea of unfamiliar interactions. So creating a new experience is risky. Creating a new kind of experience is riskier. Creating a new way to interact with an experience is probably the riskiest thing that you can do. I see a show of hands. Who here likes to fail in front of strangers? When you're sober. Right? Adults don't like to fail in front of strangers. Children have a problem trying random stuff, but if it doesn't work the way they expect it to, they get frustrated and angry, and that's a failure in their parents' eyes, right? And that's just going to flow uphill. And the reality is that, sure, we could create instructions that show people what to do, but, people just want to dive right in. We're creatures of habit. We do what we have been trained, we've experienced, what we intuit something is going to do. And things that don't work as behaved, people assume they're broken. And that's a big part with digital systems, right? It's not that they're stupid. I think that the system is not properly designed. And so there's been a lot of talk about, well, design it so that it feels natural, right? Well, natural doesn't mean intuitive. You guys probably are all familiar with the Rain Room at this point. It's this beautiful installation where you walk into it and you stay dry. It's natural. Walking is natural. There's nothing intuitive about thinking the rain's going to stop when you walk under it, right? That's a big disconnect. And so there needs to be that kind of leap of faith, and we have to teach people how those things work. So if you watch the video, it makes sense. And that's something that I think a lot of us have fallen into, is this idea of the case study effect, which is you see this really cool experience that somebody designed. It's a great video, and you're like, wow, that looks really cool. And clients see these things, and they call us, and they say, we want that. But the problem is, that person knows exactly what they're doing. That's an expert user. That guy, I guarantee, knows exactly where to stand. He knows what gestures to make, right? But it's not incorporating the real world chaos of what happens when 3 people walk up there, or the guy's not standing in the right spot, or there's sunlight on him, or all of the weird things, right? So there's a lot that goes into that that's sort of hidden that we have to plan for and not fall into that trap. The one really interesting Alex Kipman, who was one of the inventors of the Kinect at Microsoft, he gave a really great example of when they were designing a driving simulator, right? And this is very early on. They started bringing people in a focus group, and they said, okay, you've got a thing that works by using your body, right? It's completely gesture driven. So how do you steer a car? And so people would come in and they'd stand in front of the TV, and sure, some people would do this, but some people would do this, and some people would do this, and some people would move their hand right and left. And what they realized is we've spent decades building these user interfaces that people need to learn. but now we need to build systems that adapt to the people that use them. We can't assume, especially in public space, right? When we've got a few seconds or a minute or something to capture someone, we need to really be adaptive. We need to plan for the worst case scenario. So that's a big part of what drives this new design practice. And ultimately, for me, it comes down to expectations, right? So I want to talk about setting expectations, meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, and managing expectations. So this first idea of setting expectations, right? Has anyone heard of Nordic LARP? Thank you. I learned about this last week, honestly, at a conference. I mean, I've been familiar with LARP. LARP stands for live action role play, right? And it's this idea where you create a world, you create rules for that world, people step into that world, and then they behave based on these rule sets, right? And that's a big part of what we're doing with some of these experiences as well, is we're creating this thing, and they have a concept called the magic circle, right? Where within this magic circle is the rules don't behave the same way that they do in the real world. And a big part of what you're doing is you're granting people permission to have this different experience, right? And the boxing ring is a great example, right? Within this ring, it's okay to beat the crap out of somebody else and for you to cheer for it. But if it happens in the parking lot, you're gonna get arrested, right? And so that's a big thing, is we need to give people permission to step into these spaces and do something differently so that it doesn't feel like failure, it doesn't feel risky, it doesn't feel strange. And then coming back again to this idea of affordances, right? We need, the affordance, the possibility of an action on an object or a thing. We need to scaffold on the familiar, right? If we're creating a new interaction paradigm that someone hasn't experienced before, we kind of need to meet them halfway, right? And Catherine was talking about, if it looks like a button, it should be pushed, right? But maybe we want to do something else that should be pushed. So we need to throw in a little bit of the familiar so that people kind of feel confident. We need to build their trust, and then we lead them down the path of showing them how the other stuff works. Now, when the iPhone first came out, I want to keep going back to this, nobody knew how to use the iPhone. This was totally an unfamiliar interaction paradigm. But the ads were brilliant, right? Because just watching the ad made you an expert user. By the time you picked up the iPhone, you knew how to unlock it, you knew how to navigate it, right? We call this idea latent learning. And we use this a lot in our pieces, which is this idea of the person standing behind the person interacting with the system is learning how to use the system. So it's essentially our advertisements. We're trying to design ways where we can make people expert users just by being in the environment, which then increases their confidence that they're going to go in and have a positive interaction. Once we've met expectations, now we need to, once we've set expectations, now we need to meet them. So the first is this idea of ensuring that everyone's successful, right? Even if we set expectations properly, we need to plan for the worst case scenario, right? And this is going back to that case study example, right? What happens when multiple people run up to this thing at the same time? Or somebody's standing in the wrong place. We need to set the bar for interactivity at ground level so that people just fall into it, right? Like, oh wow, this is amazing, not, okay, I gotta figure this out and then I'm gonna try it. So it's about scaffolding the experience. And we talk about this in storytelling too, right? You kind of gotta have a build. So we're building the way that people walk into these experiences so that by the time they're ready to do what they wanna do, they are an expert user. The second thing is we have to recognize that people are gonna be in very different states of mind when they come into this, as particularly in the public space. Right? Some people are in a rush and they're distracted and they're only going to give this a casual glance. Some people might be walking towards something and, again, maybe they're just a little bit curious and they're only going to spend a couple seconds with it. Or some people are willing to give us their full attention. And we need to design experiences that are rewarding at whatever level of attention these people are going to give us, right? We just know that everyone's going to engage differently. If success looks like you follow this specific path and it takes you 2 minutes and you get the prize at the end, I guarantee you're going to fail. And that's probably a big conversation. The biggest conversation that we have with a lot of clients is really just, we have to plan for this isn't going to go exactly like you expect. So we need to make sure that we can still get the same message across, still make people happy, even if they don't do the thing that you really, really, really want them to do. Going back to this idea of how we design these systems. So going back to this Intel example again, we have this principle we call garbage in, beauty out. And what I mean by that is, you ever get an error dialog on your computer? It's really frustrating. You really don't want to tell people they did something wrong. You want to give them positive reinforcement, especially in public. And this idea is anything you do should give you a positive response, even if it's not the right response. So this example here, and I'll use, this is a specific example. Our client said, well, what if somebody, we're Intel, what if somebody flips the bird and it goes up on the screen, they put it up on Twitter. We said, we got this. We're gonna make the most beautiful middle finger life form you've ever seen. And we showed it. That was the first thing I did to them when we went up and we got it. And he's like, wow, that looks gorgeous, right? So anything you did, even if you didn't get the system right, if it just caught the tip of your finger or did something else, you'd still create a beautiful life form. And that's a big part of it, right? There needs to be a really clear cause and effect for what you did and what comes out of this. And that's where we really lead into, okay, now we've kind of we've set the bar, you kind of know how to use this system. Well, how do we really take it into that magic space? And I'm never going to get tired of this diagram because once I saw this, I was like, you're totally right. This is what happens in my life as well. I take this to heart. So how do we create users who know what they're going to do, but then let them go, right? And that's a big part of it, is that we have to trust that these people are going to be captains of their own journey, right? There may be a path that we want to lead them down, but we want them to feel like they discovered that path on their own, even if it's kind of forced, right? It's like a ride. It feels like sometimes it may even feel like you have the illusion of choice. But we want people to do whatever they're going to do, make the experience their own, right? And this is where we're starting to come up with these adaptive systems, right, that are a lot more complex than we possibly could have imagined, because it's not just touch these 3 buttons and now you're done. There's a lot more to it, and we have to let people go at it in their own order, maybe even in the wrong order, and still be successful. And one of the ways that we have found to take people on this journey and make them feel awesome is we give them superpowers, right? Within this magical circle, the smart space doesn't behave like the real world. Just a little small input and you get this great output, and like, wow, I did that. Even if you didn't try to do it, right? Suddenly you feel great, you feel powerful. And that's a way to really build affinity in the system and to really reward people for their attention, right? Getting into how we deal with personalization, we need to build systems that adapt to our audience, right? This is an example of something that we did where, it's a touch-based interface, but the interface spawns exactly at eye height when you walk up to it. So it automatically adapts to someone in a wheelchair or a child or an adult. It's something we call the neighbor principle, right? We know something about you, but not in a creepy way. How tall you are is something that everyone can just know, right? Or if you have somebody else with you, right? We can use that information and we can adapt the interface based on that. And suddenly it feels like, hey, this knows me. This feels a little bit more compelling than just a one-size-fits-all interface. And finally, when we talk about how we bring people together with technology, right? We're trying to build experiences that actually reward more people, sometimes even require more people, right? So there may be something like, this is a cool experience, but if I get my friend to come over, it's that much cooler. If I get 5 people together, I'm unlocking new things and new behaviors are happening. We're getting strangers talking. We're getting people who wouldn't have normally given each other the time of day to have these magical moments together. And the system is encouraging that, right? So there's a positive feedback loop that's saying, you know what? You should be social, and you can leave your device in the pocket. We can give you this magic experience automatically. So after we've done all this, we still need to make sure that we're not leading people astray. And the first thing that I really believe is this idea that consistency is paramount. If you're going to create an affordance, if you're going to create a new interaction pattern, you have to be consistent with that. You might have multiple experiences. So if you're going to teach somebody, some gesture or some way to interact with something, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when you do the new one. Leverage that same thing, but create totally different responses, right? Now people feel like experts, and they're going to go up and they're going to try that thing everywhere, and now they're going to be really curious to see, what will it do this time? What will it do this time? And the other big part of that too is just making sure that whatever you're building, you want it to be integrated with the theme, with the rest of the environment, with the marketing, with the branding, right? We're really trying to get away from that. We bolted a screen on a wall, right? We want it to feel architecturally integrated. And pretty soon, I mean, we're already starting to get away from screens in general and things that are really non-standard, non-form factor displays. And we really want to be consistent about how we do that. Once we've earned people's trust, we really don't want to abuse it. I think we recognize the most valuable thing that we can get from anyone in this space is their attention, right? We're not looking for their money. They've either paid to get in or we might be wanting them to get into the gift shop after the fact. We're starting to see this creep in digital experiences a little bit, with the in-app purchase. I fell for it with Candy Crush. I'm like, and then once you hit that 99 cents, then suddenly you're like, I gotta uninstall this. And I'm not saying that that's where these things are gonna go. It's not as easy to just sort of swipe your credit card, but we're getting into contactless payments and things along those lines. My point is that attention is a really valuable currency these days. And if we start abusing that, people are gonna go back to their phones, they're gonna walk away. We just really need to focus on the magical side of things. And when it comes to magic, really, I think what we're doing at the end of the day, and I think this is a critical piece to remember is how we work, is we're not building magic, we're creating magicians, right? We're empowering people to have these amazing experiences so they feel like they did this. All we're doing is we're setting out the hat and the rabbit, and we're letting them pull it out. Look at the trick that I did, right? That's what we're doing. We're just creating a framework for these experiences to happen, and we're letting everyone else fill in the blanks. And with that, go make it happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Darren. I think we have time. We have time before lunch for 2 real quick questions for Darren. Anybody have questions? Anyone? Everybody's like, oh my God.
I have apparently explained everything perfectly.
Do I see any? I don't see any questions. Okay.
Question is,
we
go
do.
to lunch? No.
Wait. Question.
So for me, sometimes I feel like when an experience is too easy, it is less rewarding. So how do you balance making something kind of tricky enough, but also easy enough, right? To balance that sort of like hard, like put in some work, get reward, as opposed to, doing something fairly easy for a reward. It's not as rewarding. How do you balance that?
Fair enough. I think there's a subtlety there in that we want it to be easy for you to figure out how to get the cheese, right? But you also want you to realize that once you get the cheese, there's more to it than there is, right? We don't want you to be struggling to figure out how to even work the experience. So just because it's a simple interaction pattern, that's where we start creating more complex responses that might reveal themselves over time with deeper interaction. So we start to scaffold the experience, right? Like I say, some people are just curious. They're like, I touch it a few times, like, ooh, that was pretty. And they might walk away. Some people might say, I wonder what happens if I keep doing this. So it's respecting the fact that some people, perhaps like yourself, are just want to be like, I want to find the edges of this system. I want to try everything. And it's building things that then scaffold over time with repeat interaction. So it's really kind of a system of building on top of that. But in terms of easy, we don't want anyone to be standing out there saying, is this the right interaction? Is this the right interaction? Like, that should be dead simple. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but for us, it shouldn't be hard to use, but it should be easy to figure out how to move forward in the system.
Excellent. And time for one more. Anybody?
Back there.
All the way, I'm back.
Real simple. You made a comment towards the end. Screens are. You made a comment at the end. Screens are going away. What's next?
Well, I think when I say screens are going away, and all the AV vendors in the room can just plug their ears. No, it's more that it's familiar now, right? There was a time when putting a 16:9 screen up in an environment, people would be like, wow, what is that? And now that you go buy one at Costco for $100, it's that I think us as experience designers are always having to push the envelope to show people something they can't get at home, they can't get on their own device. So, we're starting to see, I would say screens is in something that looks like a television. So obviously projection mapped environments, we've got LED, we're getting into kinetic sculpture, right? And we're starting to look at holograms. Mixed reality, HoloLens is something that we're playing with a lot. Virtual reality is something that doesn't make sense for us because it takes you out of the here and now. But a mixed reality environment where I can see things, we can all have a shared experience and see each other at the same time, I think that's amazing. So, as we start to see those devices become more commonplace, it's going to be a bring your own headset, right? We'll all go to a theater like this and there's not going to be a screen, but this is where we see the content. Right? And there's a 50-foot, 500-foot screen in front of us that we're all having that shared experience. I think that's kind of where those things are going to happen, but I still think there's always going to be an opportunity to have some sort of magical digital experience in the real world that's unexpected, that doesn't require you to have anything on it. And a big part of that is just the digital divide. Right? We're still not at complete saturation. Not everyone has a smartphone, right? There's little kids and there's people who can't afford them, and there's many billions of people in the world that don't have these experiences. And that's why I think smart spaces are great, because you don't need anything to participate.
Excellent. Thank you, Darren.